came here, yes, here, 49 and a half years ago, to be precise. I was originally from Scotland, that's where I was educated and brought up, and I moved to London when I was 18 to do something, I had no idea what, and then I moved to the countryside, having built a small business in London. I moved to the countryside in Oxfordshire. I lived near Henley in a beautiful, beautiful old 16th century thatched cottage, which was my dream, my delight, and everything. And it was surrounded by farmland. And when I was in London, before I moved out to Henley in this cottage, I became a vegetarian. I had eaten an enormous amount of meat, like everybody does, and I became a vegetarian and basically a vegan for that time. And that brought me into exposure to ask questions about food. So I got involved and looked around, and I came across organic farming, I came across the Soil Association. So I joined the Soil Association, the Biodynamic Association, the Henry Doubleday Association, and then on the more spiritual side, which I was very interested in, the Findhorn community in Scotland, and many other groups that were involved in looking at from different angles the whole question about how to bring energy and health into the nourishment that we give to ourselves and to the community. And that led me to go talk to my neighbours out in Henley, and they were farmers. And so as I knocked on their door and went for a walk with them and said, right, why don't you just grow this barley organically? There's bound to be a market for it somewhere. And that was fine. He was very polite, very polite. And then I came back the next week and we had the same conversation. And he was extremely polite, a little bit less so. And so it went on until he came to the crunch where, I mean, the poor guy, I mean, to get assaulted by an ignoramus about farming at that time, about something that he knew nothing about and was not interested in, became quite ridiculous. So he said, Peter, he said, if you're so damn keen on this, why don't you go and do something about it? Well, you should not. Big argument about that, really, is there? You know, you either do it or you shut up, one or the other. So I said, okay. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And my little cottage that I love so much was on it, next to his land. So I put it on the market the next week, and I phoned my business partners, so Canadian people, and I said, I want to sell the cottage because I'm going farming. They all laughed enormously because they knew I'd never grown anything, even in a window box before. I had no idea what seeds were or anything. And so I did that, sold it, moved to Wales, came down, found this beautiful place. Don't ask me how I got here, it just was a long, complicated story we haven't got time for now. But I came down here and then I knew nothing, of course. But I had this small farm with about 42 acres, and I had a small tractor and an old tractor, bits of equipment, bits of hay, whatever was left from the guy who was selling it to me, who sold it to me for £25,000, including all the stock and everything else. I mean, it sounds like that's nothing, but then, of course, money was much less valuable then, by about the same amount as it is now. So, anyway, it was something I could afford just. I could buy this place and had enough money for 6 months living after that. Then I was dead. And I died, basically. So we set out and thinking, well, if I don't know anything, I've got to find a way to learn. And so I had joined, as I said earlier, the Soil Association. So I wrote to them immediately and I said, can you please give me the names of all your members in Wales, particularly West Wales? And they did that. And I wrote to them all and I invited them to a meeting. I had no idea where, but it turns out I first met Dinah Williams, who was the mother of Rachel's Dairy. And she was on the council of the Soil Association at the time. And so I said, can I have your house for a meeting? And she said, yes. Very generous woman, of course. And so we gathered everybody together, and that was the first time I met Patrick Holden and, oh, heaven knows, many other people. And the West Wales Soil Association group, because the Soil Association had many groups all over the UK, was formed. And it became a hugely successful little group. I mean, its membership went from, well, nothing obviously, but to, I think it was 165, within about a year and a half. And it was just, and we did wonderful things. I mean, just absolutely superb things. We had campaigns against, we're an environmental group, as well as a farming group, as well as a gardening group. So we encompass everything. And that was important because what I was beginning to learn was when I talked to people on the continent, they were involved in organic farming. There's a lot of people, huge number, but they were connected with the environmental groups like Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, and people like that, who were totally supportive, 100% for organic farming, which they were not in the UK. The Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace people, I didn't know anything about, nor care anything about the land, the soil. And this was, really a difficult problem, became a bigger problem later in life in the world of politics. So we started campaigning. We had an outfall campaign in Aberystwyth. They were going to dump the sewage in the sea, in the Cardigan Bay, and we said no. And so we got the town council to appoint 3 of us, Barry Stockwell, who's since died, Patrick, who's very much still alive, and myself as their technical experts. Can you imagine? And what did we know about all that? Nothing, but we learned a lot very quickly, I can tell you. And so we used to give talks about all that sort of thing. Anyway, so and we did tree planting, and that was a terrible experience because we went planting trees at night and in the weekends all around the lay-bys where they cut them down, and then the farmers would come out the next morning with chainsaws and cut them all off again because they hated trees. They got in the way of the flail mowers and everything else. So it became a real, and eventually we had a truce, and they said, you can plant some, but not as many as you want. So we said, all right, for now. But we also did other work in terms of science, because we met a wonderful man called Victor Stewart, Dr. Stewart, who became the leading soil scientist in the UK, understanding the biology of soil. He was trained at Aberdeen University in soil biology. Every other soil scientist was trained in soil chemistry, in physical chemistry, and so nothing about biology. That was not to be discussed. But Victor made a huge impression in the organic movement. He got on with Eve Balfour, and they started to create experiments that we helped in, the long tube experiments with soil, earthworms in them, and then plants growing in the top, and then we measured. We added different things to the compost in the tubes to see what effect it would have on the worms, what effect it would have on growth, whether as farmers we should mulch organic material or incorporate it, and so on and so on. All that sort of thing. It was very, very interesting. And it sort of took off. Well, it took off, but we had a little interregnum, shall we say, on the way. And that was because I had a sort of pretensions to, at one time in my life, it didn't last long, I can tell you, to become some sort of scientist. And I started training for that, and but then I got carried away with myself, and I thought, well, actually, we need to do some experiments in blind camel. And this was the second year, in 1976, with a drought, in the middle of a drought. And so what I did was I did what everybody did. You had a little seed bed, and you would grow maybe 1,000 or 2 cabbages or cauliflowers, seedlings, sort of in a row. And then you came, I didn't understand all this, by the way. I used to go out in the morning to work, and if it wasn't raining, you'd have a whole range of books about gardening, because there's nothing about organic growing anyway. You couldn't read, understand, buy anything about commercial organic growing. There was nothing to get anywhere. But on gardening, you could get lots of books. So you had lots of gardening books. You took this bit of information, mix it with that bit of information, and you hoped the melange would actually work. But I thought, it's really hot out there. The soil that the cauliflowers were going into was, it's rocky apart from anything else. Blind Campbell is really rocky. It's nothing but stones. But I thought, if I was sort of asleep in my bed and I was woken up and thrown out without any warning into the outside world without any sort of conditioning, I would feel really cheesed off about this. So my poor plants, remember this is at the time when Prince Charles was talking to his roses, and actually for me, the idea of communicating plants was a perfectly rational sort of concept. I mean, why not? And I believe they had some sentience in their being, so why not? And so I thought, I can't take these little things out of there and into the field without some help. But what help? I remembered. I'll chloroform them.
This is true, by the way.
I will chloroform them. I will go and buy some chloroform, and which was a prescribed, restricted substance, but it didn't seem unreasonable to me. And I would, anyway, so I went down to Aberyron and I said, can I have a litre of chloroform in the chemist shop? Well, what do you want it for? I want to put my plants to sleep. and so, to their credit, he showed me some. Nothing like as much as I wanted, but enough. And you would never get that today, that's for sure. But anyway, so I got my bottle of chloroform, came back, got the tea towels, and went out, and then we soaked them, and then waited till the evening, and then draped them across the plants, and then took the plants, and then ran right down to the next field and popped them in the ground, and then said, grow, when you wake up. And of course they grew beautifully, and they were spectacular. Now, so you can ask the question, well, you've obviously succeeded. I said, well, a bit tricky, because did you do a comparative trial? Oh, no. Why would I do that? Well, because you were supposed to be a scientist. Well, that's why I'm doing farming. Anyway, so that was one of our, and we had other experiments when we were doing stirring of the biodynamic preparation 501, which is silica. And so you stir it in a vortex, create a vortex, reverse the vortex, reverse it again, and keep doing that for about an hour. And you've got the water. So you've got a big barrel of water. You do it in the spring, late spring. And, I was doing this for the first time. And it was when there was an incredible sort of wet winter. So I'm stirring this water, and the postman comes up the drive, because they always came to the house in those days. And he leaned down and said, what are you doing, Peter? I said, I'm stirring. He said, well, stirring what? I said, I'm stirring water. I couldn't get around to telling him I'm stirring silica into water to capture cosmic energy, to look at this sort of, the essence of the plant, to bring cosmic energy into the land. And I said, water. And he looked up to me and said, in Wales? Anyway, so that was interesting. We did all sorts of things like that. But the Soil Association took off, and then I became appointed to the council of the Soil Association, representing Wales, and that got me involved with these people. Now, the Soil Association in those days had been going since 1945, effectively, and maybe a bit earlier. And when I went to my first council meeting, these were just incredible people. They were like, I knew nothing. I didn't know anything about farming. I didn't know anything about the history of the organic movement, other than a few books. I had been inspired by 3 books. One is of Schumacher's Small is Beautiful. Secondly, Rudolf Steiner's Philosophy of Freedom, which is the essential book of anthroposophy, or the work of Rudolf Steiner. And a book by Victor Bonham-Carter of the Bonham-Carter family, who wrote about the survival of the English countryside. And he was making generally the point that rural life and urban life was separating further and further apart. And this had enormous and deleterious consequences. So, and I was and it included lots about Dartington and things like that, but I was very inspired by this. So when I walk into the first council meeting, you've got Schumacher there, Lady Balfour there, sort of Lawrence Hills, who was the most extraordinary person who started the HDRA, Mary Langman, who became a very close friend of mine for a long, long, long time, and who else? Oh, Shul Cooper, who was a very famous gardener, who wrote books on gardening, organic gardening. And lots of Sam Mayle, who was a farmer, and his granddaughter, Ginny, is still, and son Richard, Ginny's still running the farm up in Shropshire and making oats and flour and everything else like that. I mean, just extraordinary people. I should be so honored to be in those people's company. So we carried on doing that, and I joined the Solar Association then, and I stayed with that in 1976. And then I stayed with them working off now, and just not paid working, of course, but voluntary sort of stuff, until 2009, I think it was, or 2008, I'm not sure which. People like Carolyn, by that time, people like Carolyn Wacher, who has been one of the most brilliant supporters and activists within the organic movement, a totally brilliant person, who's so selfless, I mean, just extraordinary. And the work she did for OGA for all these decades is wonderful. And Patrick Holden, my best and closest friend, for the last 40 odd years, 50 years, is just incredible. And lots of other people. Very bright people. Lawrence Woodward came along a bit later, not much later, but then, I mean, incredibly interesting people. And we decided that we had done a good job to get the West Wales Soil Association group together, so growers were getting a bit of help. But for us growers, we needed more technical, and we had nowhere to get it. So we thought, why don't we bring all the growers of Britain together and make something interesting out of that? So I asked the Soil Association to give us £200 to put on a conference at Cirencester. Long story about that, but it's another day. And we held the first conference on 2nd of January 1980 at Cirencester, and it was sold out. There was 280, 300 people. And it was wonderful, and there was incredible people that came from around the world, from Germany, and then the next year, when we did it again, we had people I got the environmental minister from Brazil to come across to give us a talk, because he was a radical, and it just got into power after the army. Anyway, that's a whole story about that, and very interesting. But the great development there was that Harry Vochman, and thanks to Lawrence Woodward, Professor Vochman came from Switzerland. He had been studying in Canada and then came back to Switzerland to do work at the New Research, the first major organic research organization in the world. And he came across and gave the first of, I don't know, hundreds of visits to the UK. And without him, either the Prince of Wales, nor us, me, you, and probably everyone would have developed as much as we have done. But that was an incredible development. So that was good. We paid the money back to the Soil Association, the £200. We made a profit, and that carried on with OGA funding itself. So we funded ourselves. We had no money. We were never going to get any money from anybody, by the profits from the conference, and by creating a whole raft of a range of packaging for growers, specific for growers, and there was a good reason for that, which we'll come to later. But we created tomato boxes, root sacks, potato sacks, labels, and millions upon millions of paper bags that said, "Eat organic, food you can trust." And it had on the back of the bags the names and addresses of all the organic organizations in Britain. And that allowed people to contact anybody else they wanted to. So that, I mean, they just sold massively. So we made money from that to help, because none of us got any money for anything. There was no finance to pay anybody anything. So it all had to be done on our own. But we did actually find another way, and this was mainly with people like Charlie Wacher, who sadly is no longer with us, but married to Carolyn Wacher, obviously. But he and Cholly at one time, but other people like John Blake and Francis Blake and many, all the growers came to the committee meetings and brought produce and sold it to each other. And so you had this great trade going on because we were doing publicity to help develop everything, and that created demand which we could satisfy. So it was very nice, and it helped other growers obviously as well. So all of that sort of helped us develop, and then we came to a problem in the Soil Association, because basically the West Wales, no, what happened, let me tell you right. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher was elected to power. And one of the first things she did was to announce that the waste from the nuclear power stations in Britain would be consolidated and dumped in deep mines in the middle of West Wales, where all of us lived. And so never has there been a more unanimous, total, and ferocious rejection of any political policy, even more than these silly farmers at the moment, who said, no, you're not doing it. So we created a group of all the anti-nuclear groups and into one umbrella group to get power called WANA, the Welsh Anti-Nuclear Alliance, and I happen to be the chairman of that. And so we went and asked all other environmental organizations to come and help us. And they did, every one of them. And then we got all the councils, county councils in Wales to help us, and they did. And we found this policy to get everybody to agree that nothing was coming into Wales. Wales would be, in that sense, nuclear free, even though slight difficulty at Trasfynydd and Wilfa producing nuclear electricity, but that wasn't to last for very long. Anyway, the Soil Association then found out that we had, West Wales Soil Association was supporting this thing now. You have to understand that the Soil Association, the landed gentry of Britain are by and large conservative. Well, actually, totally so. And so they immediately came back and said, the General Secretary wrote me a letter and said, Peter, we can't have this. You can't be involved in the political world. And so you must disassociate. So I went to the membership of the West Wales. I said, what do you want to do? And they said, no, we're staying with it. And I said, back to them, we're staying with it. Oh, you can't do that. I said, well, we are. And so that brought a crisis. And it was that problem I mentioned earlier about the understanding of people involved in agriculture with the environment and with politics. It was all mixed up. It wasn't very clear. And we had to become clearer because we came from reading the sort of books I mentioned and many, many more. And philosophically, you were committed to a holistic activity. You couldn't separate these matters. The environment was connected to agriculture, connected to the soil, connected with animals, connected with water, connected with air, connected with social activity. It was one and could never be broken up. So to say that you cannot be involved in a campaign to stop your land being polluted with nuclear was just impossible. So, but the new president of the Soil Association was a guy called O'Hagan, and Lord O'Hagan, and he was an MEP in Strasbourg. And so he got very angry with me, particularly, but all the group in the council of the Soil Association, we talked about it, and on the council, we were 70% supportive and 30% antagonistic. And it got worse when I went with a great nuclear declaration from Wales and led a group of people, politicians, to Strasbourg, to the Parliament. Then I walked into the Parliament full of bouquets of daffodils, because it was St. David's Day, and festooned the whole building with daffodils. And in walked Lord O'Hagan, and the first person he saw knew it was me, undermining the whole of the establishment there. So it's, I got even more sort of that. And Eve Balfour, unfortunately, wonderful person that she was, and she had decided to back him and made a bad judgment. And that was unfortunate, because nobody wanted to have a problem with her. But we had to, so it was a question of whether I stayed or whether she stayed. And in the end, she didn't stay. And so we had that horrible period. And it was a very difficult period. But it meant that we had to change in the Soil Association. And so we did. And so we changed everything, the magazine, all sorts of other things, membership campaign. But particularly, we decided, after asking the membership where they would like a new headquarters to be, because we were then in Suffolk, you know, right out on the east coast. And it took about sort of 10 hours to drive from Wales to Suffolk. And we had to do this for committee meetings and other meetings, God knows how. It was horrendous. And the consensus was Bristol. And that's what happened. We moved to Bristol. And then, I think it was 1985, maybe 86, I had to, at that time, because I had been running like a madman to try to grow, to learn how to grow, which is another discussion for some other time, to learn how to grow and to have the different organizations I was involved in, of which there was more and more. To do all this, you couldn't do it well, and I wasn't. You know, I was building up, in traditional organic fashion, a good debt to the banks. We had to keep on doing it, so something had to happen, so we were just rushing around. And then I rushed back from signing the lease for the Soil Association when we moved into Coulson Street in Bristol. And crash, bang. Then we had an accident. I ran into the back of a lorry. My legs below the knee were both of them all smashed up, and ankles and everything. And I was in hospital for ages. And without this wonderful woman, there would be no story to tell today. And this was what happened. And I would like to ask Anne if she would come and tell you. I might not like it, and I have no idea what she is going to say, but she will tell you what happened there. But before we do that, we've got a few pictures. We're not very good at this sort of thing, because we don't give talks anymore. But there's some pictures here. You can't see them very clearly yourself. You think you can, okay, and you're okay at home. But there are just a few. And so Anne will describe some of them, and I will describe others.
You have to sit down, then we can both listen.
I've got no chair.
And move over.
You have to speak up.
Right. Well, this first one is one of our multi-span polytunnels. We've got 2 4-bay multi-spans and 2 2-bay twin spans, and the odd single one. But this is our oldest multi-span. Looks like early summer, because I'm afraid to say I'm in shorts. And what can we see? Spinach by the look of it. And I think where I'm standing, we've got early aubergines, peppers, chilies, that kind of thing. And right over in the background, peas. Whoops. This next one shows our delivery boy, who's the smallest grandchild. Why we're letting him cycle through a crop escapes me, but we do. This shows the turnaround of one of the bays, so that if it's a multi-span, there will be 4 of these bays. I think that's the true span, actually. And it shows that we come in by tractor, actually, and we top dress with compost before certain crops, not before every crop. Mostly before things like the early potatoes that we grow, tomatoes, cucumbers, all the fruiting crops get compost. And then we, after they've finished, then we grow green crops like salads and spinach without any more compost. This shows what it looks like after preparing the beds. You can see even in the greenhouse, we've still got stones.
You can look at the stones there in the greenhouse. They're small stones, but there's still a lot of them. We've been destoning this every year for 40 years. But the other interesting question is, when we first started, the organic matter level of the soil in all these greenhouses was about sort of 5.5, not very high, but well, high, not very high in a grassland situation, it's quite high in an arable situation. But the last time we took the readings on this and sent them off for analysis, it was 19.5. I mean, it's just unbelievable compost, and it has so much power and resilience, and it's beautiful, and the color has changed totally. It's gone from a sort of nice, perfectly lovely reddish brown sort of soil to a dark brown, almost black soil. It's just wonderful what you can do with compost. Anyway, that's one of the things we do on the farm, like everybody does. The green manure, that has to be mustered, and we just cut that and incorporate it and mulch it on the field.
And it's nice because you can see the trees in the background, because although we're growing crops on the farm, it's about 12 acres, is it, of vegetables, and then we've got fields of green manure and so on. But we've got acres of woodland and hedges as well, which over the years we've seen how incredibly valuable they are with insects.
We have a fantastic, I don't know, such a wonderful environmental diversity, but I think it is. I mean, we see huge amounts of birds, good variety of birds, wildflowers. We've catalogued the birds and the flowers, and yeah, it has to be good because we don't have so many diseases or problems or pests.
Well, we do get occasionally a bad incursion, which we did 2 years ago of aphids. It was an absolute swarm that came through our valley. All the neighbours got it, black fly. It was dreadful. And we thought we'd lost all our brassicas. They were crawling all over the plants.
You couldn't see the green of the plant. They were completely, they were attacking people walking on the roads nearby. And it was just like all over. It was the most unbelievable infestation. And we thought I just planted out about 20,000 brassicas, and we thought, right, that's
all
it,
we
gone.
could do was put the irrigation on and really water like mad. But 4 days later, my son came and said, they've all dropped off. And we went and looked, and the predators had come in. It was beyond, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised, for goodness sake. We've been doing this for years, but I was astonished.
Me too.
Yeah. And then we had a virus band round the plant as it grew, because the aphids had brought in a virus, but then the plants just grew up the middle and were as good as ever. It was extraordinary.
This one is just a picture, I think.
It's a Welsh misty day.
It was Roger who was asking about the farm next door to me. Was it you, or was it somebody else that was asking it?
I think I was asking
it was you. Yes, Oliver. Pennuke, yeah. That's land owned by a very close friend of mine, a neighbour, and we took it over because it had been ruined and wrecked by other farmers for 50 years. It'd never been treated with anything, and we took it over just to see what we could do with really bad land. And that was the first second crop. First one was brassicas, and that was the potato crop that came out after it. You can see that they are a fantastic crop of potatoes. And that's what we do probably most of. It's clover, and we're cutting it and mulching it, or we're cutting it in this case, and we will ensile it and take the bales of silage down to the compost site, and then we will mix that with the wood chip and any manures that we have, any vegetable waste we have from the greenhouse. So everything is gathered in and turned round and mixed up and then gone through this particular process of composting that we'll see shortly. That's our dog who always gets into every picture that ever was. And that's some squash in one of the small fields. This is quite some time ago. And that's carrots. It's just the way we grow carrots. It's with fleece to protect against carrot fly, and it works perfectly well. And that's gardens. For some reason, Anne and I decided to have acres and acres of gardens, though we didn't have enough to do. And so we built gardens everywhere, and I haven't got time to show them, but they were beautiful. They are no longer as beautiful, I can tell you. We just ran out of energy, ran out of time, and now we've got lots of shrubs and lawn and things like that. But the idea of having sort of permanent beds of perennials and things like that is a death wish. But anyway, they were absolutely beautiful. And that back to clover again. I keep taking pictures of clover. And that's the compost site. We have about 7 or 8 of these 50-meter rows every year, and sometimes more, sometimes less. And it's thermophilic. It's a long story, the compost, and it's a very interesting story, but there's no time now. That's what, and the tomatoes.
Those are cherry tomatoes.
Cherry tomatoes.
You'll see there we've got the white paths and white string. We do get bad light levels around here. There's no two ways about it, and you can really increase yield through upping the light levels. So we put these white paths down just.
And white strings.
And white strings. We do take the paths up as soon as we stop watering overhead, because we switch to a ground floor system, and then we take the paths up as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's just beans.
Which we haven't got this year, everybody, but because of the.
We've got lots of packets of
lots of seeds.
Bean seed, millions of packets, and we got an awful lot of early potato seed in sacks, and
everything's everything's in the shed.
For anybody else who's suffering that's present here today, let me tell you, we're all
in the same boat.
We had the worst year last year that we've ever had, by an awful long way. And it was what saved us mainly was the greenhouses, because the greenhouses produced. And so we have endless supply of spinach and salad and all sorts of stuff like that. I mean, endless. Because we have about 1.25 acres, 1.5 acres of covered area. So you can, if you turn it round really fast, and you can see in the pictures, it's very intensive. But and the fields, it's extensive. But that's a picture of potatoes, obviously, and that's some more pictures than the garden, one of the gardens. And that's the wonderful one. That's the joy of, we have lots of areas. We've added to the land. We have about 52 acres now, but most of the extra land we bought from neighbours is for environmental purposes, it's not for production. And so we've encouraged deliberately a reduction in the fertility of those fields to encourage the flowers, and the development of the orchids and all the other flowers is just wonderful to see. It makes you almost cry when you go out and you see it. It's superb. Anyway, so that's all we got time for there. So it's now.
How much, is there much time?
I mean,
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, we've got about 20 minutes.
Oh, okay. Just a general comment. There's a lot of what I would talk about happened so long ago that it's a bit of a broad sweep. And also the comment that it's a good thing you asked us this year, because I think in another year we might not remember quite so much. And another comment, someone much more famous said, memories may differ. But I definitely joined Peter at Blind Camel in 1981, and we worked alongside each other for 4 years till the Big Bang, which was in 85. And so the first set of challenges, because the things I'm going to say are mainly about the challenges over the years, but the first set of challenges were personal. No Peter. He was in hospital 35 miles away with 2 broken legs. He didn't say, but he had 3 breaks in one leg and 17 in the other. So there had to be really a lot of operations. So he was in hospital for a month and off his feet for 9 months. And at home, there were 2 young boys and a 2-year-old and me. But on the positive side, it was September, and so there were crops in the ground. So I do remember visiting Peter in Carmarthen with a handful of potatoes on his lovely white clean sheet and saying, this is a sample of potatoes. Should I be trying to get them out of the ground now? I don't know what the nurses thought. No grapes or flowers. So it was a question of coping. And I have to say, that feeling that you're in a community, it was extraordinary. First of all, we had quite recently formed a growers cooperative. There were a lot of growers in our area in Wales, not that big a population, and so selling our stuff, oddly enough, was a challenge. And so we had formed a cooperative to start logically moving stuff around to where it needed to go, which was, given that Peter had this accident, it was great, because if I could get crops out of the ground, they could get sold by the co-op and money would just go into the bank. So that was amazing. Also, high up on the list of people we should thank, there were 2 students on the farm at the time, Martin and Richard, and they went through this baptism of fire with me, and they were amazing. It wouldn't have been such a happy ending if it hadn't been for them. And then there were local grower and farmer friends, people like Gareth Rowlands and Matthew Merton, and they came to the farm and they looked around and they said, worry about that, don't worry about that. Gareth reorganised the shed so that there was a goods in and a goods out. I mean, all sorts of things like that. It was brilliant. Local neighbours just turned up and did things. I was in such a tiz, I didn't really know what was going on, but I found a tractor would be moving, planting things, and not perhaps where you want it. But anyway, I also have to mention our long-suffering bank manager. He was Midland Bank in Lampeter, and he had the misfortune.
Midland Bank is HSBC,
sorry, yeah. He had the misfortune to underwrite all the local organic growers and farmers. I mean, can you imagine? We were all, well, we weren't all in hospital, but yeah, he was amazing. Because I don't remember any financial crisis at the time. You know, this money would go in the bank if I could get veg out. Anyway, Peter eventually came home on crutches or in a wheelchair, and it was very difficult because our soil is ever so difficult. It's very stony, and the crops we grew, we did grow on ridges. But it was the way it was. So Peter found that once he could drive, he went in and helped out with the co-op in Lampeter, and this is where the memories are a bit different, but what grew out of it was organic farm foods, which was a major operation which helped us all. So following this huge personal challenge, which worked out because of all the support around me, the next phase really was a technical and professional challenge, because with the foundation of organic farm foods, Blankhamel, with the history Peter has told you about, we started growing for supermarkets. So there was a major technical catch up to do, really, shall we say. And also we carried on with the wholesale business as well. So technically, we had to develop growing programs. We had to understand continuity of supply. You couldn't just run out of stuff. Quality and specialization. What we did was to reduce what we grew. We cut down to about 10 things. Both protected and in the field. So outdoors we grew little gem lettuce, and when I say that, it was by the hundreds of thousands. Courgettes, calabres, and inside we grew cherry tomatoes, and I think, I genuinely, this was in the 80s, I think it was amongst the first cherry tomatoes that were in supermarkets. Mini cucumbers, they definitely were only just coming in then. So they were almost, an organic thing, I think. In the winter, all our greenhouses grew parsley for Waitrose. The plants were mostly brought in. I did grow some, but pallets of young plants would arrive because you'd had a program, you'd ordered a program of plants, they'd just turn up. Never mind the weather, they'd be in the yard, wouldn't they? You had to get them out somehow or other. It was nerve-wracking. Every day was a race then to get the picking done. We had a 28-foot curtain-sided van and pallets, and all stacked up off the farm, and then you got on with the day's work. So there was no running around the county in a small van, 5 of this and 6 of that. It was major amounts went out. The advantages, well, no packaging, everything went out in crates, returnable crates, that was nice. Any grading got done in Lampeter, that was possibly controversial, I suppose. There were very high technical demands, and you hear lots of criticism, don't you, of supermarkets not wanting bendy cucumbers, for example. But actually, bendy cucumbers aren't an organic thing. That's bad trade. You haven't looked after the fruiting crop properly. And what the supermarkets did do was to send people out. They had very good technical people. So if you could bear it, they would come and advise you. And I would say, I would never say that I regretted that period of supplying supermarkets. Learned a lot, met a lot of other growers, learned to grow in coordination with growers abroad. We had a lovely relationship with mini cucumber growers in Egypt, because when we stopped in October or whenever it was, they took over. So that you had your counterparts in a warmer climate. That was the continuity of supply. So it was very lovely. And of course, in the winter, it was quiet and we could have a holiday.
No longer.
So it was a big technical challenge, but I wouldn't say that I regretted it. And in parallel to what was going on the farm, there were changes afoot as well with the organic movement. There was a big professional challenge to us all and a move towards professionalism, which Peter's mentioned with the foundation of the old OGA and the Cirencester conferences. Looked at from my point of view, we had lovely talks when someone like Douglas Blair, I don't know if you remember, he had been a conventional glasshouse grower, hated spraying, converted to organic, became an organic grower, but he'd get up on stage and really shame us. I remember once he showed a film of packaging he had encountered from organic growers, and it was all recycled and falling to bits, and and he really shamed us and said, you've got to be more professional about it. And it is funny, isn't it, now, because we're always recycling our packaging now and no one minds at all. But anyway, Douglas felt that that we should have proper packaging, and he would also, for a whole conference session, quite selflessly devote it to teaching us how to train peppers, which was just so sweet, really, just saying, no, you take that one off and you do that. Also, Joy Larkham was at the early conferences, which was where we got the first idea. Well, we used to call it a hedgerow salad, the very first one we did for Waitrose, I think, wasn't it? But we've developed it. We've never stopped doing a salad mix since Joy Larkham talked about her trips to Italy and China.
Just to interrupt, Joy Larkham is one of the most amazing people. She went off to, and nobody knew about salad packs and mixed salads, and she went off to Italy and she just wandered around.
Called it saladini, yeah.
And she found the saladini, and she found different varieties of lettuce, brought them back, and came to Cirencester and inspired everybody to get in. And it's been, for many growers, it's become one of the main foundations, economic foundations of their range. And we owe it really to Joy. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no. At about that time as well, an EU, because of course we were in the EU then, but there was an EU regulation on organic compost. The plants had to be organically grown. And this was a challenge because we were using conventional compost at the time. And what the growers did, and this was at the Cirencester conference, we decided that the way we could deal with this was to self-impose a levy, so that every plant we produced, we paid, was it a penny or a fraction of a penny on, probably a fraction of a penny. And the money was put into a pot and a research fund was started so that we could develop a proper organic propagation compost. And we did, and that's what happened. And that's very interesting now because I don't know about you all, but we've had a there have been some very good organic composts for plant raising around, and now there still are, but we've got another big change with going peat free. I'm certainly struggling a little bit to learn how to use it, and I think we probably need more research, but it's just a comment. And at the same time also we imposed on ourselves organic horticulture standards with the Soil Association. The standards were, first of all, horticulture, before all the other ones. And so horticulturists could be certified straight away. And for us at Blind Camel, we actually ran into difficulty through bad management of our greenhouses. We started to pick up root problems with tomatoes, probably because we had too short a rotation, I suppose, with cucumbers and cherry tomatoes. So we had to look at more general compost making much more seriously, and which led us, in fact, into the whole rather serious compost making, which we still do on the farm to this day. But it was introduced by Organic Farm Foods and advised by them as well. And you'll see that system because all their growers used it all around the world. And a consultant will come out and help us with it. It's called controlled microbial composting. And whilst it was just a technical challenge that we went through, whilst we were solving the soil, we started using grafted plants so that we could carry on producing whilst we were actually dealing with the problem. So that was another technical challenge that we went through. So the first challenge for me was the personal one of Peter's Big Bang, and then these technical and professional challenges of becoming good growers. Then challenge 3 came after about 20 years, when Peter stopped working for Organic Farm Foods, and there was an adaptation, really, because we didn't want to grow for supermarkets anymore. And Peter, one of his first main jobs was to do a very big analysis of our carbon footprint, which led to a decision that we only wanted to sell our vegetables in Wales, and that we would do that initially, and then we would bring our sales closer and closer to home. And which is why, to this day, we sell to farmers markets, to our own little shop, to various local customers who run restaurants and shops. And my son Tom, who runs a small box scheme in Cardiff where he lives, so he comes up to the farm once a week, packs boxes, takes them down and delivers to mainly people from Ceredigion who live in Cardiff. So this, of course, then brought another technical challenge, which is you can't just grow 10 things if you're trying to supply and make a living year round. So we now grow about 50 crops, and we grow 52 weeks of the year, which is why Peter said we never go to holiday. So, and also, yes, I grow all the plants now, which is actually the aspect of the work I most enjoy. It's a wonderful gateway into the work of the farm, is if you produce plants for it. But what I would say, and this shouldn't be, so those were the three main challenges, personal and farm-based, but there is a fourth challenge, which I should have said right at the beginning, really, because it's not a footnote, and it's an existential challenge, which is climate change, which is so evident to us. We made some adaptation in 2012, 13, when we knew we weren't coping. So the early signs must have been there. We had a snowstorm and lost greenhouses, and various things happened, extreme weather. And we decided that the only way really that we could manage our crops with any sense was to increase our number of greenhouses. And arguably, I suppose we should have even more. But so the fourth challenge is climate change, and how on earth it came up this morning, didn't it? How are we going to adapt to it? What if we want to be growers, and what if this country is going to eat? What are we going to do? Yeah.
Just like 7 minutes, 8 minutes to finish off. If that's all right with you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I will just briefly do this because, and there's a reason for it. When we were developing and getting involved in different activities in the organic movement, you came across a range of the most extraordinary people who obviously influenced you. And the whole concept of holism took deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper root inside anything and everything we did. So we had to find ways of manifesting that in the commercial activities and the work the farm did in the community. And that was an extraordinary time and a very exciting time, the likes of which I could never have imagined before. I mean, with organic farm foods, we got involved in the question of food and health. And this is a huge area, very complex area, and an area that has no end in sight, because to prove the question is beyond complicated and expensive. To understand it is a bit easier, and so we did things like we got involved in the biocrystallization methods of food quality analysis, the drop picture method. We did other interesting things, like I did an experiment once, and it was written up in a Danish food quality research magazine about cucumbers. You could try this sometime if you like. The whole concept of food, living food, as opposed to dead food. It was interesting. I took a cucumber and just was playing around, and I sliced it very finely, and then brought it back together, and then squeezed it and wrapped it in cling film and put it in the fridge, and then put a conventional one alongside it, did the same thing alongside it, and then after 5 days came back to see whether it had died, because it should, you know, that's how long cucumbers would last, roughly speaking. But it was still green, the organic one. The conventional one was a bit yellow. But the extraordinary thing, when you took the plastic off, actually the whole cucumber stuck together. it had sort of grown. And we thought this is really interesting. But anyway, there was so much going on that we never got much further than that with it. But it still worked for somebody to go and do something about. But we did work on behalf of iPhone. The we is the interesting question here. We had formed a group called the IAP, the International Association of Partnership in Ecology and Trade, a real mouthful. So it became known as the Desert Club, because there was a whole group of the leading commercial companies in Europe and the world, actually, got together because they had bumped into each other, and they were all connected through anthroposophy or biodynamic farming. And the leading supermarket in Germany, Alnatura, the biggest tea people in Germany, the biggest vegetable person in Holland, Eosta, and so many other companies, all were going and sourcing product in Egypt. And we came together with this organization called SECAM, which, if any of you ever have the chance to go to listen to a lecture by anybody from SECAM, online or offline, I mean, take it. They are the most extraordinary organization in the world. It's huge now. They went into the, anyway, I haven't got time to tell you
SEKEM.
but it's an extraordinary organization. It's completely a holistic organization. They're involved, they have hospitals, schools, universities, farms, everything, all connected, all under biodynamic agriculture and organic agriculture. And they were the center of our group. And our job it was nothing to do with our commercial work. It was using our companies to try to bring leverage on experts to understand certain problems that were facing organic producers, like social standards. So we would bring people who were involved in social standards, experts, and we would ask them to come and talk to us, and they would tell us this or that. So we evolved the standards, gave them back to iPhone, they implemented them. We looked at food quality research. We set up Food Quality and Health, which is an organization based in Holland, and also with Professor Votman, who, if you remember, came to Cirencester in the early days. But one of his great things with his wife, who was an expert, Maria Angelica Plöger, actually developed all sorts of work in Germany and Switzerland on food quality that was extraordinary. And so they made an impetus into the area of food quality, and from that has moved on. I mean, we worked with religions and brought people who were connected with all the major religions in the world to come together to really talk about, because the major religions of the world own almost 25% of the agricultural land in the world. And so if we could get them to actually change their thinking, but their thinking was quite difficult. And when you tell a Christian that, you know, you're not actually doing the good thing the way you're running your land at the moment, and this idea of having dominion over nature that Christians are fond of quoting is completely opposite.
We are in a church.
No, I take nothing back. I take nothing back. Anyway, there's all sorts of things like that, and it was just wonderful because you'd have discussion about, and everything you did was deepening your own self-knowledge, and then you were trying to manifest it out into the community. And that's what we all do. It's what all of you do in every way you're doing it. You're taking your own interests and converting that into something and taking it out into people. And it's a wonderful thing to observe and to be part of. And I would say the big difference between the OGA today, or organic growers today, and then, in one sense, we've got a better situation today because there might not be much, but there is government money coming to growers one way or the other. There are more grants for finance coming to growers, certainly, than there ever used to be. There used to be nothing at all of any interest. And I think that the distribution systems, while still difficult, are relatively simple in comparison to what they used to be. We had to run round up and down to London, you know, to sell our vegetables from West Wales. It was, you know, a bit crazy, but we had to do it. And so now you've got information in a way that never existed before, and you've got masses of it and masses more to get. And it's extraordinarily much easier to do it, but you've got bigger challenges with the climate, with the soil, and how that's going to work. What was easy to grow before, almost formulaic, has suddenly become individualistic and non-predictable. And so how we change for that is going to be... So, the one thing that is not changed, except in scale, is the millions of growers that I had the privilege to bump into all over the world, who are people of my age, who in the 60s and early 70s decided to change what they were doing and going out, and they were everywhere. From Russia to China to America to every part of the world, all had the same belief: cover the soil, protect the soil, feed the soil. And the only difference today is there are millions and millions and millions of them. Nearly 40 million organic growers all over the world. And that's a fantastic community to be part of. Thank you.
I'm going to be really annoying and use this as a roving mic. So if anyone has any questions, please wait for me to bring it to you, and then I'll have to bring it back to them, just so the online people can ask. And I'll also try and alternate questions between the room and the online room. So go to you first, Pete. Stay with us.
Thank you so much, Peter and Annie. Wonderful, as always, inspirational, and I mean inspirational because my compost operation now is totally based on what you do, and I've been watching what you're doing for a long time, and now I've managed to almost replicate it, and I concur with everything you say. One of the things is your compost video is on the Sustainable Food Trust, so if anyone wants to watch a bit more about what Peter says, he's probably forgotten, but it's on the Sustainable Food Trust, but it's on the Sustainable Food Trust website. It should still be there, so thank you so much, both of you.
I think your video is also featured in Tractor Ted's Organic Farm Visit. Yeah. I might be wrong, the DVD, well worth a watch even if you're...
I think my daughter features it.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Fantastic watch.
She was outrageous.
But my... Sorry.
She was up there moving compost around the Farmer Ted thing, and she had sandals on.
But my actual question is, having been through 40 odd years or whatever, do you think it's easier for market gardeners to survive financially now, or 20 years ago, or 40 years ago? What are your thoughts on that?
Sorry.
Oh, you are wonderful. No, it's a fantastic question. I think it's easier now in many ways, because if you have a market, and there's quite clear number of people in the country, or the percentage of the population, who are committed to buying food produced properly and paying a reasonable price for it, and a price good enough to make a living out of. But if you are playing the market without measuring or trying to manage reasonably supply and demand, then you're in for bigger trouble than you ever would be in the past. So get your market, create your market, build your market, and keep your market, and be responsible for your market, because it's incredibly valuable.
Is there a straight money question again. How do you find the farm gate price for what you're doing now compares to what you've been getting before?
Talk about your own system.
What system?
Disconnecting. Okay.
If she's telling you something I don't understand.
No, your pricing structure to our customers is unusual.
I see what you mean. Yes. Well,
You might not want to
no,
talk
but
about
it still answers. It still doesn't quite answer Jim's question. I mean, what we've done with the shops, I just had it with buyers, up to here. People go on about supermarkets. Well, shops were just exactly the same. They're ruthless. They will screw the growers down left, right, right. The supermarkets do it with greater sort of panache and brutality. But they're completely terrible. But so are shops, our wholesalers. I mean, a buyer's job is to look after the buying. And so there's nothing to be surprised about that they're pretty horrible. And so I thought, I don't like that. And so I'm not going to have it. I don't need, fortunately, I'm in a situation where we are comfortable. I'm not trying to say that we're scraping money or anything. We're perfectly comfortable. So we don't need to produce lots of stuff. But I love doing it. And Anne loves doing it. So we'll carry on doing it until we can't carry on doing it. And so we went to the shops and I said, listen, if you want to carry on with us, with local food and have local food and get real good service, then here's the deal. We will determine the retail price. That's the question, how do you determine the retail price? I'll come to that.
Well, we didn't want people selling much more expensive than we sell in our own farm shop, because it seemed...
Well, that was the reason why we don't like them, because
Yeah.
we couldn't control what price they're selling at. So we give them a good price because we had lots to sell, and then they would just put the margin up, and that didn't work for us. So I said, no, we will determine the retail price. It's not your business. We will agree with you a fixed retail margin that will be fair, good. You will determine the quantities that you buy every week according to a program that we work out every year. And you will be responsible for making the in-store signage to promote the product. And we would like a section of our product in the shop with that information on it. And any quality problems are our responsibility. We will take them back and credit you. And we started that 4 years ago, 5 years ago, time goes. And it's brilliant. I mean, it just means that I have to think what the retail price should be. So I look at the conventional prices in the shops, I look at some organic prices online. I try to take a reasonable, sensible position, but it can be that our prices are under conventional slightly. It can be that our prices are way over the organic prices in anywhere else. It's a little bit mixed up with what our costs of productions will be. So we try to make it like that. It's not a scientific means, that it's a feeling that this is what you think you can sell your product for. You know roughly what you need to get to make it profitable. And yes, but it means there's no work to do every week. There's no arguing anymore on the phone to spend all the time. Yes, it's Peter here, and it's like being welcomed to the den of the devil. So when you phone up, so it's wonderful. So you just say this is what's available this week, and that's it done. It's easy.
Easy.
We've got time for one or maybe two more questions. Anyone else? No? It's up to you.
So I really just wanted to ask how optimistic you felt about the supply of growers I suppose in Wales generally now, and because obviously maybe there's a lot of growers of your generation who are perhaps are starting to maybe think about retiring, may or may not have succession.
Growers
And
never retire.
but slowing down. But obviously there are new growers coming in, but a lot of them are maybe going for the smaller scale, more intensive salad market. Do you feel like there's a shortage of people doing the big field scale?
Oh, of course there is. Of course
And
there is.
what do you think about that, basically?
Of course there is. I mean, it's good news, basically, in my opinion. For some reason, I'm not entirely sure, I'm on the board of an organisation called Farming Connect in Wales. And dreadful little people. But you see the number of new growers coming in, because my responsibility on the board is horticulture. And you see the number of growers, young growers, probably more women than men, almost certainly so. And the numbers are growing quite rapidly. And they were not 4 or 5 years ago so much, but they are in the last year or two. And so there's a big increase in, and mostly smaller growers, and that's a problem because there's not they're underfinanced, generally speaking. They work unbelievably hard, and they're incredibly skillful. So how do you change that? That's why you need money from the state to help them to get through this period, this difficulty, until they build up enough trade. But it is a real problem for young people to get enough land, to produce enough food and have enough capital to buy the things. I mean, I went along this line when we started. We didn't have the money, as I said in the beginning. And so I never had a chainsaw because I didn't believe in chainsaws. I thought, I have to saw because that's what you do. And that took me about 5 years, 10 years to get over. That shows how thick I am. And then you would do things like strimmers. No, I'm not having a strimmer. I learned how to scythe, so you scythe, and then you're like, God, how stupid can you get? For the cost of a strimmer and a chainsaw and a rotavator, I mean, life can be so much easier. And so you need the money to buy these things. Well, there are grants, but the whole grant problems. Anyway, so there are tremendous developments with young people coming in. The problem, the serious problem, is they can do, because it's small, relatively small scale, and that's great, they can do the flowers, they can do more flowers, herbs, all sorts of things like that, specialist salads. They can find a range of specialist crops to do fruits, perhaps. But it doesn't address the question of the cauliflowers, the broccolis, the potatoes. That needs a wholesale mass of young sons and daughters of regular middle-scale farmers to commit themselves to a new market, which they would do if they didn't have so many bloody hang-ups about the philosophy of farming, in their view. And that's a real problem. And I suspect it's going to be a sort of river and dam effect. The river will build up and break the dam at some point, and then it will come. But how to get them there, we've been trying for a long time, but not succeeding terribly well. But I think it will come. And the new Act, the Sustainable Farming Scheme, I think that can do it. I think it's a brilliant scheme. I mean, it's got lots of problems, some problems, but it could be the best thing that happened to organic production, which we need desperately. And the small people need it, the small growers need it, and the big growers need it, need the small growers to be successful as well. It's a mutual independency.
Great. We're running really behind on time, so I'm going to leave it there. One last time for Peter and Annie. Thank you. If anyone has any other questions, I'm sure you can grab them in a break or something. We're going to go for a 15-minute break now. So that will take us to 25 to 4. We're going to do some breakout groups. I'll just pause this, sorry. Thank you, everyone who came online.